Another clash of the gridiron gladiators. This is Sega Masters. We have arrived at September of 1989, which would end up being a watershed moment for the Master System's run in the US video game market, as we'll eventually see. We begin our look at Sega 8-bit releases for that month with the long-awaited next entry in the second wave of sports simulations for the console that started with Reggie Jackson Baseball. This time it's Walter Payton Football, the second, or technically third football title for the console. If you remember, Sega's original attempt at a gridiron simulator for their 8-bit console was the rather unremarkable Great Football from way back in 1987. Not only was the gameplay rather plain, it featured one of the most bizarrely constructed single-player modes of any sports simulation. You were immediately thrust into the fourth quarter and given a deficit you needed to overcome before the clock ran out, and you were forced to play the entire game on offense, never getting a chance to play defense. If that wasn't enough, this car was actually released twice in the US, the second time as Sports Pad Football. Not only did the second version feature the exact same flawed gameplay, it also forced you to use the ill-conceived Sports Pad trackball controller. Much like the other entries in the Great Sports line, Great Football was looking rather long in the tooth by 1989, especially compared to the wave of updated football simulations popping up on Nintendo's console around that time. That does include one particular title, Tecmo, released for the NES that had long been considered the gold standard of 8-bit gridiron cartridges, at least until its infinitely superior sequel came along over 2 years later. Sega eventually decided their 8-bit console was overdue for an updated football title of its own, and just like Reggie Jackson Baseball, got a famous name attached to it. In this case, they went with Walter Payton, who's considered one of the best running backs ever to play that position in the National Football League. Payton, often referred to as Sweetness, rushed for over 1,200 yards in 10 of the 13 seasons he played in the NFL, all with the Chicago Bears, while making the Pro Bowl 9 times and earning the NFL's Most Valuable Player award in 1977. And of course he helped the 1985 Bears shuffle their way to a Super Bowl title. Even though Payton had played his final season in 1987, Sega figured he was still well known enough to get him to endorse their new football cartridge. Oddly enough, evidence suggests Payton was originally scheduled to be released in the spring of 1989, possibly simultaneously with Reggie Jackson Baseball, but got delayed for whatever reason. It finally reached the North American store shelves in the fall of 1989, when the Master System's future in the US was looking cloudier by the day. On a side note, this cartridge was also released in Europe, though under the rather generic title American Pro Football, since the Walter Payton license was only good for the US version. Other than the removal of Payton's name and likeness from the title screen, both cartridges are identical. Regardless of the name, this cart quickly shows how much of an improvement it is over its predecessor, starting with a decent selection of customization options. You can of course challenge a fellow human player or take on a CPU-controlled team, and 2 gameplay modes are offered for the solo player. Monday night games lets you play a single contest, while Road to the Super Bowl is the playoff tournament. The Monday night option has 3 difficulty levels to choose from, and you can also pick whether to play with a continuously running clock, or have the time stop for incomplete passes or out-of-bound plays just like the real thing, as well as 2 options for the length of each quarter. Next is the team selection screen, and 28 football clubs are available to choose from, all based in actual NFL cities, and even split into 2 conferences of 3 divisions each that mimic the real league. However, you don't get the actual nicknames since this cart lacks an NFL license, just the cities and their colors, or close approximations. Also, all the teams are pretty much the same with no unique stats or attributes among them. Once the 2 teams are chosen, you head out to the field for the traditional coin toss to determine which team gets the ball first. Incidentally, Walter Payton's face on the coin marks his only actual appearance during the game, as no real players are featured here, so you'll have to use your imagination as to who's who. After the opening possession is decided, it's time for kickoff. Anyone who's seen an American football game on television will know what to expect as far as the action goes, as the standard rules and scoring are followed here. Outside of some close-up scenes for kicking plays, the bulk of the action is viewed from overhead with a vertically scrolling field. Unlike Great Football, you're actually treated to a full 4 quarters of gridiron combat, and also giving the actual opportunity to play on defense as well as offense, even in the solo mode. Following each stoppage of play, the huddle screen appears. The offense has 12 plays they can choose from to advance the ball, while the defense attempts to oppose them with one of 7 formations. Then it's back to the field to see which side is more successful in their efforts before both ends each call their next play on the huddle screen. Actually executing these plays isn't too difficult, thanks to the controls which are responsive and easy to understand for the most part. However, passing, always an essential function in football cartridges, can seem unusual and even a little tricky at first. After taking the snap, you're required to tap a direction on the D-pad to choose which of your receivers to throw the ball to before hitting button 2 to let it fly, often trying to accomplish all this while your quarterback is scrambling to avoid being sacked. It doesn't help that your intended target isn't highlighted until you release the ball, often leaving you guessing as which your receivers are attempting to connect with, especially any that may be down the field and out of view. On top of that, the defense can quickly converge on your intended receiver, leading to constant incompletions, or worse, interceptions. The issues with passing can be overcome with enough practice, and if anything, this card has a solid running game for you to fall back on. Once you get used to the controls, you'll have little trouble leading your team up the field and into the end zone for that all-important touchdown. Place kicking for extra point attempts and field goals uses a pair of golf game style meters to set the power and spin of the kick, and you can alter your stance to compensate for the wind if need be. The same setup is also used for kickoffs and punts. In a nice touch, at the conclusion of each quarter, you're presented with a screen showing your stats up to that point before play resumes, something you won't find in Tecmo Bowl. Overall, the action in Walter Payton moves at a nice brisk pace and is much more enjoyable than great football, especially for head-to-head competition. The solo gamer, on the other hand, will have to rely on the normal hard settings for any real challenge from the CPU opponent. It's not terribly hard to exploit the computer AI on the easy difficulty with just 1 or 2 plays, letting you run the score up rather effortlessly. The other levels, on the other hand, the CPU will give you an actual test that forces you to mix up your plays and employ some actual strategy if you hope to triumph. You also treat it to some decent presentation as the game unfolds, with plenty of bright, appealing colors being used to craft the game's visuals, though the players themselves can look like multicolored blobs at times, and plenty of flicker does pop up when too many sprites appear on the screen. The field itself does sport some solid details, including a somewhat humorous FL logo at the midfield stripe that comes oh so close to infringing on the NFL's iconic emblem. The well done cutscenes of the referee never intrude on the action, though a few of them feature some muffled and scratchy voice clips. Much like other Master System cards, the sound effects can be hard on the eardrums, especially as you navigate through the playbook. The background music, which occasionally changes in tone between plays, is a mixed bag with all the tracks containing that trademark upbeat Sega vibe to it. Once all 4 quarters are in the books, you're given the final stats for the just completed game. Oddly enough, you're also presented with a rather lengthy password. The idea is you use this password to carry your win-loss record and stats over to the next Monday night game you're participating against another opponent of your choosing, even if you turn the console's power off. Since Walter Payton lacks a real season mode, you're essentially left to craft your own schedule. Granted, this is a nice idea in theory, yet the passwords are a bit painstaking to have to re-enter every single time you start the game back up. Not to mention the results of your string of Monday night games don't have any real influence on any postseason brackets, hardly making it worth the effort. In fact, the Road to the Super Bowl option works independent of the Monday night mode. You just pick one of the 28 teams to navigate through the playoff tree to the big game, and the brackets, which mimic the NFL's postseason format up to 1990, are randomly generated, with one team from each division being selected as division champion with no rhyme or reason. Sadly, the squad you picked is never one of them. You're always forced to start in the wild card round, and have to play through all 4 tournament games in one setting with no way to save your progress after every victory. It'll make you wonder why the password function wasn't used for this purpose instead of carrying stats across a bunch of meaningless exhibition games. In conclusion, despite its rough edges and a few ideas that don't quite pan out, Walter Payton is a mostly well-done representative of its sport, and football fanatics will find plenty to like here thanks to its decent amount of depth, variety of plays, and smooth gameplay. At the same time, Sega's cart can't really compete with the streamlined pick-up-and-play feel that made Tecmo Bowl such a favorite of 8-bit gridiron gamers, and casual fans of the sport may be better suited with that title. Still, if you really must have a football cartridge for the Master System, then Walter Payton won't disappoint. At the very least, it represents a mostly positive step forward in Sega's football history.